My name is Samantha, I'm 28, and a year ago I buried my child. He never made it past the 7th month inside me. My pregnancy was a storm of hospitals, bleeding, and whispered prayers that ended in silence. The smallest coffin I've ever seen became the heaviest weight I've ever carried. And my mother didn't come. Not to the hospital. Not to the funeral. Her excuse? It wasn't a real baby. You can't mourn something that never lived. Today I stand in a crowded room, at my younger sister Rebecca's birthday, pretending to celebrate while my grief still claws at me from the inside. A room full of relatives, balloons tied to chairs, laughter over clinking glasses. It's been a year since I buried my child, and only now does someone finally take my hand, look into my eyes, and whisper, "I'm so sorry for your loss." I can't imagine the pain. Before I can even breathe, my mother appears. She lays her palm dramatically on her chest, her voice shaking just enough for the whole room to hear. "Do you know how hard it's been for me? I lost a grandchild too. I've suffered more than anyone here. More than Samantha herself." Heads turn. Sympathetic eyes fall, not on me, but on her. And I stand there, invisible at my own child's wake disguised as my sister's birthday party. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Because this wasn't the first time she stole my voice, my pain, my existence. She'd been doing it my whole life. Favoring Rebecca. Punishing me because I looked like my father, the man who left her. Turning every family gathering into a stage where I was the villain and she was the star. I had survived her cruelty as a daughter. But now, after losing my child, I refused to survive it as a mother. Before I tell you how I turned that night into the beginning of my revenge, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had your grief stolen by the very person who was supposed to comfort you? Drop a comment. Share your story. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next didn't just change my family. It burned down the empire of control my mother had built. When I was 2 years old, my father walked out the door and never came back. I don't remember the moment itself, just the absence that followed. The empty chair at dinner, the way my mother's face hardened whenever his name was spoken. For her, I became the embodiment of his betrayal. Every time she looked at me, she didn't just see her daughter, she saw the man who abandoned her. Not long after, she remarried. My stepfather was quiet, steady, and kinder than she ever allowed him to be. He treated me fairly, sometimes even with a gentleness that startled me, but he always stood in her shadow. If he tried to defend me, a single look from her was enough to silence him. And then Rebecca was born. From the start, the contrast was brutal. Rebecca was light, laughter, promise. I was the reminder of pain. Mom poured all her warmth into my sister, shaping her into a reflection of everything she believed she deserved after the failure of her first marriage. But her control didn't stop with Rebecca, it extended to me as well. When I achieved something, she twisted it into her own triumph. If I brought home a perfect grade, she would smile to the neighbors and say, "Of course she did well, she takes after me." I've always been the smart one in the family. And then, when the door closed, she would lean in and whisper, "Don't get arrogant. Your handwriting ruined the paper." That was her way, praise in public, daggers in private. With Rebecca, she praised and believed it. With me, she claimed the spotlight and then made sure I knew I wasn't worthy of it. I remember one science fair. Rebecca glued together a lopsided model of the solar system, and Mom bragged to everyone about her brilliant future scientist. She dragged neighbors over to admire it, glowing with pride. I, on the other hand, spent weeks on a research project that actually won first prize. On stage, applause washed over me, but backstage, Mom's voice cut through like a blade, "Don't act proud. You only won because the judges felt sorry for you." Then she told the others, I helped her with the idea. It was really mine. That's how it always was. Rebecca's accomplishments were hers to showcase. My accomplishments were hers to steal, then disarm with criticism before anyone else could notice. Birthdays told the same story. Rebecca's parties were grand, balloons, cakes taller than her, music that echoed through the house. Mom dressed her in ribbons and introduced her as my miracle, my joy. When my birthdays came, the celebrations were smaller, quieter, and afterward she'd tell guests she doesn't mind. She's more serious, not the type to need attention. As if my silence was a choice, not the consequence of years spent being overshadowed. Through all of it, my stepfather tried in small ways to soften the blows. He'd slip me a book he thought I might like, or quietly tell me he was proud when I came home with an award. But he never raised his voice to my mother. He lived in the quiet corners of the house, avoiding storms instead of fighting them. And in that silence, I learned the same skill, how to endure. When I left for college, I thought I'd finally escaped. Journalism became my rebellion, a voice that no one could take away. It was also where I met Alex, the man who saw me as something more than a shadow. He listened. He valued. He stayed. But even in adulthood, the script didn't change. At family gatherings, Mom continued to praise Rebecca's every step, her job promotions, her new apartment, her dresses. And when someone noticed my achievements, Mom was always quick to claim them. Of course Samantha published an article, she gets her writing talent from me. Then later, when no one else could hear, it wasn't that good. Don't think this makes you important. The difference between us was sharp and undeniable. Rebecca's light was nurtured. Mine was borrowed, then snuffed out. I met Alex my freshman year of college. He was the kind of person who noticed small things, the way I always sat at the back of the lecture hall, the way I fiddled with my pen when I was nervous, the way I went quiet when people raised their voices. He asked me to join him for coffee after class, and I almost said no. Years of being told I was invisible had trained me to decline invitations before they were even finished. But something in his smile disarmed me. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was steady, unshakable warmth. That coffee turned into long nights in the library, studying side by side. Into walks across campus in the cold, his jacket draped over my shoulders when I shivered. Into the first time in my life someone actually asked, "What do you think?" and waited for the answer. With Alex, I discovered what it felt like to be seen. Truly seen. But love, as beautiful as it was, didn't silence the echo of my mother's voice. Even when I brought Alex home to meet my family, her coldness cut through everything. She looked him up and down, lips pursed, and said, "Don't get too attached. Men leave. He will too." Alex stayed polite, shook her hand, and later, when we were alone, he told me, "That's not about me. That's about her." Still, her words clung to me. They always did. Every visit home became a battlefield. Rebecca's latest job interview? A celebration. Mom beamed and told everyone it was thanks to her coaching. My first published article? Claimed as her idea. She gets that talent from me. I used to write essays that impressed all my teachers. In public, she wore my success like a crown she'd crafted with her own hands. In private, she stripped it away, one cutting remark at a time. It wasn't that good. Don't act like this makes you important. And I believed her, even as Alex tried to remind me of my worth. He would take my articles, print them out, underline his favorite sentences, and leave them on my desk with little notes, "You're brilliant. Don't forget it." For every dagger my mother slipped under my ribs, Alex offered a bandage. Still, there were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself why I kept reaching for her approval. Why did I keep sending her my work, telling her my news, waiting for the rare smile that might break through? The answer was simple, though I hated admitting it, I wanted a mother. I wanted her to see me, just once, without comparison, without criticism, without that shadow of my father between us. But the years passed, and the script never changed. Rebecca bought her first car, Mom announced it to the entire neighborhood. I graduated with honors, Mom told everyone it was because she pushed me so hard. Rebecca dyed her hair a new color, Mom posted pictures on social media, calling her beautiful. I won an award for investigative reporting, Mom shrugged and said, it's not like it was the Pulitzer. The difference was endless, exhausting, undeniable. Rebecca's smallest victories were amplified. My greatest ones were muted, redirected, or stolen. And through it all, Alex stayed. Patient, loyal, sometimes frustrated, but never leaving. He learned how to navigate my silences, how to hold me when my mother's words carved too deep, how to remind me that family wasn't supposed to feel like a constant wound. But I wasn't ready to let go of the hope that one day my mother might change. I still sent her my articles. I still called with news. I still sat at the family table, waiting for the moment she might look at me with pride instead of resentment. That moment never came. Instead, it was Rebecca's name that echoed through every gathering, every toast, every conversation. She was the miracle child, the joy, the living proof that my mother had triumphed after her first marriage failed. I was the opposite, the reminder of betrayal, the shadow she couldn't erase. It didn't matter that Alex loved me. It didn't matter that I was building a career. It didn't matter that I was carving out a life on my own terms. In my mother's eyes, none of it was enough. And the worst part was, I still kept trying to prove myself to her. Our wedding was nothing grand. No cathedral, no banquet hall, no 5-tiered cake. Just a courthouse ceremony, 2 witnesses, and a dinner afterward at the tiny restaurant where Alex and I had shared our first date. I wore a simple dress I bought off the rack, white cotton with a ribbon at the waist. Alex wore his best suit, navy blue, a little worn at the cuffs, but his eyes outshone anything money could buy. When we exchanged vows, it wasn't about the setting. It was about survival. About building something of our own, free from the shadow of my mother's house. Of course, she didn't come. She claimed she was too busy with Rebecca's career fair. She didn't send flowers, didn't call, didn't even ask how it went. In her eyes, my marriage was just another distraction, not worth the attention she reserved for my sister. But Alex and I didn't need her. We built our own life in a small apartment with cracked paint on the walls and a window that looked out on nothing but alleyways. To me, it was a palace. The first home where the air didn't carry my mother's judgment. It wasn't long before we started dreaming about children. We talked about names, about schools, about bedtime stories. We weren't naive, we knew it wouldn't be easy, but the hope was intoxicating. And when the test turned positive on the very first try, I thought maybe the universe was finally giving me something without taking it back. The first few weeks were a blur of joy and fear. Alex kissed my stomach every morning before work. I carried around ultrasound pictures like precious jewels. But then came the bleeding. The dizziness. The hospital visits. The doctors spoke in low voices, using words like high risk and complications. I was told to rest, to avoid stress, to prepare for the possibility that things might not go smoothly. And in that fragile state, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't, I turned to my mother. I called her after my first scare, my voice trembling, asking if she could come sit with me. She sighed, long and heavy, and said, "Rebecca has an interview today. I can't be in 2 places at once." When I asked her again, after another hospital visit, she told me, pregnancy isn't a disease. Women have been giving birth forever. Stop acting like you're special. Her words stung more than the needles in my arm. Sometimes, when I tried to talk about the fear, about waking up in the night with cramps so sharp I couldn't breathe, she brushed it aside with stories of Rebecca. Her new promotion, her new haircut, her new boyfriend. My pain was an inconvenience, Rebecca's smallest milestones were monumental. Alex tried to fill the void. He cooked when I couldn't stand, drove me to every appointment, sat by my hospital bed reading articles aloud to distract me from the machines beeping around us. But there was still a hollow space inside me, one shaped like a mother's hand on her daughter's shoulder, a comfort I never got. As the months dragged on, the pregnancy became a battlefield. My body was failing me piece by piece. The bleeding worsened, the headaches became unbearable, and sleep slipped away entirely. Each day, I counted down to the 7th month, praying I could make it that far. And then, one night, the cramps returned, violent, unrelenting. Alex rushed me to the hospital, my body shaking so badly I could barely stand. The hallways blurred into sterile white, voices barked orders I couldn't process. The last thing I remember clearly is Alex's face, pale with fear, as the nurses wheeled me into intensive care. 7 months pregnant. And my body was giving up. The light in the hospital was too white, too sharp, like it was trying to erase everything human. Machines beeped, nurses whispered, footsteps echoed down long corridors. I remember gripping the rail of the bed as pain tore through me, every muscle in my body convulsing, my breath shallow and broken. And then, silence. Not the silence of relief, not the cry I had prayed for, not the sound that would have changed everything. Just silence. The doctor's face told me what my ears already knew. My child never took a breath. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, as if the world had stopped and left me behind. Alex was the one who broke. He sat by my side, clutching my hand so tightly it hurt, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, over and over, "I'm here. I love you. Nothing will ever make me leave. Not this, not anything." His words tried to stitch together what had been ripped apart, but I was numb. My arms were empty, and no promise could fill them. The next day, when I finally stirred from the fog of sedatives, I saw my stepfather standing awkwardly in the corner of the room. He wasn't a man of many words, never had been, but there was something in his eyes, quiet sorrow, respect, that made me realize he was grieving too. He walked closer, placed a hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, kiddo." It was more compassion than I had ever heard from my own mother. She didn't come. Not that day. Not the next. It was only on the third day that she appeared, swept into the room with Rebecca at her side. I knew instantly it hadn't been her idea. Rebecca's eyes darted nervously, her hand pressing against Mom's back, guiding her forward. Mom glanced around the room like she was entering a stage she hadn't rehearsed for. Her face held none of the softness I craved, only tightness, irritation at being forced into a role she didn't want. She said nothing to me at first, only muttered about how hospitals smelled like bleach and how she couldn't stay long because Rebecca had things to do. I stared at her, waiting, for an embrace, for a word of comfort, for something. Instead, she sighed and said, "You need to be strong. These things happen. At least you're still young." Rebecca squeezed her arm, whispered something in her ear, but Mom only shrugged. Then they left. Together. When the funeral came, the chapel was nearly empty. The coffin was so small it looked more like a box for flowers than for a child. Alex held my hand through the entire service, his thumb rubbing circles into my palm, grounding me in a world that suddenly felt weightless and cruel. My stepfather was there, sitting quietly in the back, his presence steady even in silence. But there was no sign of my mother. No sign of Rebecca. They hadn't even bothered to pretend. I stood over that tiny coffin and felt something inside me unravel. Grief wasn't just sadness, it was acid, corroding every part of me from the inside out. Nights became endless tunnels of tears, days blurred into shadows. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a woman. I saw failure, emptiness, a body that had betrayed its own child. The doctors said there might be another chance, someday. That one tragedy didn't mean I would never become a mother. But their words felt hollow, distant. All I could hear was the echo of my mother's voice. It wasn't a real baby. I began to fear she was right. That maybe I was cursed. That maybe I was never meant to cradle a living child. Alex never let go. He held me through the sobs, whispered love into the cracks of my despair, told me I wasn't broken. But grief doesn't listen to reason. It digs into your bones, makes you question every part of yourself. And as I lay awake at night, staring into the dark, I wondered not just if I would ever be a mother, but if I would ever be whole again. Recovery was not a straight road. It was more like walking through fog, every step uncertain, every breath heavier than the last. My body healed faster than my heart. The stitches dissolved, the bruises faded, but the emptiness remained. For weeks I barely left the apartment. The sight of strollers on the street, the sound of babies crying in the grocery store, they all cut into me like glass. Nights were the worst. I'd wake in a cold sweat, my hands reaching instinctively for a child who wasn't there, clutching at air. Alex never left my side. He made tea I never drank, cooked meals I barely touched, held me when I shook with sobs so violent they stole my breath. His voice was steady when everything else was chaos. We'll get through this. Together. But I knew he couldn't carry all of it for me. I needed something more. It was Alex who found the support group. Just try it once, he said, his hand over mine. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. The first time I walked into that room, I wanted to turn around and run. The circle of chairs, the dim lighting, the quiet hum of whispered conversations, it all felt too raw, too exposing. But then a woman about my age smiled at me, her eyes carrying the same grief I saw in my mirror. She patted the chair beside her. And slowly, I listened. Stories poured out around the circle, of miscarriages, of stillbirths, of hopes shattered in silence. Women described pain that mirrored my own, the empty arms, the insensitive comments, the loneliness of walking through grief while the world moved on. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel defective. I didn't feel cursed. I felt understood. When it was my turn to speak, the words stuck in my throat. But Alex squeezed my hand, and something cracked open. I told them about the hospital, about the coffin too small to hold a life, about the mother who said it wasn't real. My voice trembled, but no one dismissed me. No one turned away. They nodded. They cried with me. They held the silence in reverence instead of fear. Week after week, I returned. And each time, the fog lifted just a little. I began to believe what the counselor said at the end of every meeting, your grief is not weakness. It's proof of your love. But while I found strength in strangers, I lost more ground at home. My mother grew even more distant. It was as if she had decided my tragedy was contagious, something Rebecca needed to be protected from. She stopped calling altogether. When I reached out, she deflected, changing the subject to Rebecca's new boyfriend, Rebecca's weekend trip, Rebecca's big plans. Soon the news came, Rebecca was serious about someone. A man Mom adored instantly, calling him the kind of son-in-law every mother dreams of. She spoke of their future family as if it were already written in stone, children, holidays, grandchildren to dote on. Every word was a knife. It wasn't just that my mother dismissed my pain. It was that she erased it entirely, replacing it with fantasies of Rebecca's perfect future. To her, I wasn't a grieving mother. I wasn't even a daughter worth mentioning. I was the mistake she wanted to forget, the shadow she refused to acknowledge. But in that support group, in Alex's unwavering love, I found something she could never steal, the possibility of healing. I realized grief would always live inside me, but it didn't have to be my prison. I could carry it and still stand. Still breathe. Still fight. And as I sat in that circle of women, listening to them reclaim their voices, I began to wonder if my pain could be transformed into something else. Something sharper. Something stronger. My mother thought she had broken me. But she had only given me a new reason to rise. A year had passed since the hospital, since the silence of that delivery room swallowed me whole. Time didn't heal, it just dulled the edges until I could walk again, until I could stand without shaking. But the weight was still there, pressed into my ribs like a second skeleton I couldn't shed. Rebecca's birthday came around again, and with it the announcement my mother had been waiting to flaunt. Rebecca was introducing her fiancé. His name was Daniel, and before I even met him, I knew he was already perfect in my mother's eyes. The house was decorated as if royalty were arriving. Balloons clustered at the ceiling, streamers curled around door frames, champagne chilled in silver buckets. The dining table gleamed with plates Mom never used for me. Rebecca floated through the room in a pale dress, her hand entwined with Daniel's. Mom orbited around them, her voice high and proud as she told every guest, my daughter and her future husband. Aren't they beautiful together? I stood in the corner with Alex, holding his hand tighter than I meant to. He leaned close, whispered, breathe. We'll get through tonight. I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. Every detail screamed of contrast. When I got married, it had been 2 signatures at a courthouse and a dinner at a diner. No guests. No fanfare. Certainly no mother raising a glass to celebrate me. But this was the coronation of her chosen child. I tried to stay invisible. I smiled when appropriate, shook Daniel's hand, even managed polite conversation with a cousin I hadn't seen in years. For most of the evening, I pretended well enough. Until it happened. One of my aunts approached me, her eyes soft, her hand brushing mine. She lowered her voice, almost afraid to speak. Samantha. I never told you, but I am so sorry for what you went through last year. I can't imagine the pain. You're stronger than anyone I know. The words cracked something inside me. No one in this family had dared to speak of it. For 12 months, silence had been the rule, as though my baby had never existed. Hearing it acknowledged was like a sudden breath of air after drowning. My throat tightened. I wanted to thank her, to let the tears come. But before I could, my mother swept in. She placed her hand dramatically on her chest, her voice pitched loud enough for half the room to hear. Do you know how hard it's been for me? I lost a grandchild too. People forget that I suffered more than anyone. The room shifted. Heads turned. Sympathetic murmurs rippled through the guests. Not toward me. Toward her. She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, shaking her head as though she alone carried the tragedy. It nearly destroyed me. No one understands how much I've borne in silence. And just like that, the moment was gone. My aunt's hand slipped from mine, her attention drawn to the spectacle unfolding in front of us. My grief, the only thing that belonged entirely to me, had been stolen. Repurposed. Performed. I stood frozen, my chest burning. It wasn't enough that she had ignored me in the hospital, skipped the funeral, dismissed my child as not real. Now, in front of family and strangers alike, she dared to crown herself the victim of my loss. Rebecca rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, her face lit with the glow of attention. Daniel followed a step behind, his hand settling firmly at Rebecca's back, murmuring words of reassurance as though he already belonged in their circle. Together they formed a picture, my mother weeping, Rebecca radiant, Daniel steady at her side, stepping seamlessly into the role of protector. And watching them, I realized I had no place at that table. Not as a daughter. Not as a sister. Not even as a grieving mother. Alex tried to shield me, wrapping his arm around my waist, whispering, "Don't listen to her. They don't see you, but I do." His voice steadied me, but inside, a storm raged. Because at that moment, something shifted. I had spent years enduring, hoping for scraps of approval, waiting for the day she might choose me. That night, in the swirl of laughter, champagne, and stolen grief, I understood, she never would. She didn't just dismiss my pain, she used it. She fed on it, transformed it into another performance to keep the spotlight fixed on her. And as I watched the family circle tighten around her, I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just cruelty. This was theft. And I wouldn't let it happen again. I didn't confront her in the kitchen or at the dinner table. I didn't scream in the driveway or throw a glass against a wall. I did the one thing I've always done best, I wrote. It started as a paragraph on my phone at 3 in the morning, one honest sentence after another, the kind that cost blood to type. By dawn it was a draft. By noon it was an op-ed I sent to the local paper, not as a detached reporter but as a grieving woman. I wrote about the stillbirth, about the circle of metal chairs in a church basement where women like me learned to breathe again. I wrote about silence, the kind that cuts deeper than words, the kind that pretends nothing happened. And I wrote about the absence of support from the one person a woman needs most in moments like these, her own mother. I didn't use her name. I didn't have to. In a small town, truth has a way of walking faster than gossip. The paper agreed to run it with my byline and author photo. Not a faceless essay. Not a nameless confession. Me. Staring out from the page, telling my story in my own voice. We ran the piece the following Sunday. The front page was reserved for a council vote and a high school game, but my op-ed filled the center of the feature section. The headline was quiet, deliberate, the grief they refused to see. By afternoon the whispers began. At church, people didn't say her name, but they lowered their voices when she passed. Mrs. Caro from the choir tilted her head and asked, "Did you see the paper?" in the tone people reserve for scandals and miracles. The ushers avoided my mother's eyes. 2 pews back, a teenager nudged his friend and pointed at the photo. Everyone knew the story. Everyone knew who had failed me. On Maple Street, neighbors lingered with their mailboxes open. At the florist, the owner asked my stepfather if he needed help choosing flowers for a difficult week. At the bakery, the man who always saved the best cinnamon rolls for Rebecca saved one for me instead, slid it into a bag, and said nothing but "I'm sorry" with his eyes. My mother did what she always does when the ground tilts, she tried to turn the tremor into applause. She called the editor, demanded a retraction, accused the paper of slander. But there was nothing to retract. My name was there. My photo was there. My truth was there. And the whole town had read it. She called me next. I let it go to voicemail. Her message came out in shards. "How dare you, you ungrateful girl, how could you shame me like this? Do you know what people will think of me?" Until her voice broke on the one truth she couldn't swallow, "You made them look at you." For the first time in my life, I had taken the room without her permission. Rebecca called too. Her voice trembled. "Sam, why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" I almost laughed. I had told her for years, just not in a language she could understand until strangers translated it for her. "I didn't want you to choose," I said. "I thought if I kept bleeding quietly, you could keep your crown clean." Daniel's parents read it as well. They lived in a brick house with a porch swing and geraniums that never seemed to die. People who believed in Sunday calls and casseroles when tragedy struck. When they saw the article, they didn't call me. They called their son. They asked him if this was truly the family he wanted to marry into. If this was the grandmother he wanted for his future children. The wedding didn't shatter. It simply unraveled thread by thread. The venue remained booked, but deposits went unconfirmed. The dress stayed in its garment bag. When people asked for a date, Rebecca said, "We're taking our time," and smiled with lips that trembled. My stepfather never liked phones, so he came in person. He stood in my doorway holding the paper, folded to the page with my face on it. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was finally standing taller. "I should have spoken up a long time ago," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't. I am proud of you." We sat at the kitchen table and ate soup Alex had made. The steam fogged his glasses, and he laughed, pushing them up with the back of his wrist. My stepfather told me about the first time he saw me, 2 years old, clutching a plastic horse with 3 legs, watching the door as if someone still owed us a return. "I wanted to stay from the beginning," he said. And I did. My mother avoided the grocery store for a week. She sent Rebecca for milk. Rebecca came back empty-handed, eyes down. When I finally saw my mother in the parking lot, sunglasses on, head high, she walked like a woman pretending she wasn't burning. She adjusted her scarf, met my gaze for half a second, then looked straight past me. I thought it would feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like standing in a field after a storm, counting what the wind had taken and what it had left. The article didn't bring back a heartbeat. It didn't lift a coffin. It didn't fix a childhood. But it did something smaller, sharper, braver. It drew a line. Here is where my mother ends. Here is where I begin. The paper later asked for a follow-up, practical help, resources, numbers for families who needed a place to breathe. I wrote it. I interviewed the counselor from our group. I asked the women for the words they wished someone had said to them on the first day, the third week, the seventh month. We printed those words in bold. I taped the page to my fridge, not as a trophy, but as a map. Letters began to arrive. Not many, it's a small town, but enough. A librarian who had lost twins 15 years ago and told no one but her husband. A man whose sister refused to say his niece's name, as if silence could erase her. A high school girl who wasn't ready to speak but felt less alone knowing the room existed. Alex watched it all with his quiet devotion. He kept making tea I sometimes forgot to drink. He fixed the wobbly chair that had been wobbly for years because grief had taught us to live with things that shook. When I asked if I'd done the right thing, he didn't answer with principles or numbers. He just said, "You told the truth. And you built a door for others to walk through." The Sunday after, I went back to the church basement, sat once more in the circle I had written about. No one applauded. No one needed to. They made space, the way they always do. The counselor nodded at me not as a guest, but as a pillar, someone strong enough now to hold the weight of another when her legs begin to shake. There is a myth that revenge tastes like sugar. Mine tasted like iron. It wasn't the sweetness of watching my mother shrink, it was the strength of watching myself stand. I did not set her world on fire. I lit my own. Rebecca hasn't chosen yet. She stands between a man who loves her and a mother who loves only herself. That is not my choice to make. If the wedding comes, I will go, or I won't. If it doesn't, I will not dance on the ashes. I have other dances to learn. I planted a sapling in the patch of dirt behind our building, the kind of tree that doesn't ask for much, just water and presence. My stepfather brought the shovel. Alex held my hand while I pressed the soil back into place. The city won't notice the leaf that turns first. But I will. I used to think slaying demons meant watching them collapse at your feet. I know better now. Some demons die when you stop feeding them, when you stop begging for their blessing, when you stop writing yourself as the quiet girl at the edge of the photograph and step, without apology, into the light. I am building a future with both hands. One holds the love I was given. The other holds the love I learned to give myself. Between them, there is finally enough space for a life that belongs to me.